The New York Attorney General has launched a criminal investigation into former President Trump and his business dealings. This escalates what originally started as a civil probe into whether Mr. Trump's company filed false financial reports to secure loans and get tax breaks. The Manhattan District Attorney's Office has been conducting a criminal investigation into the former president since 2018. CBS News national correspondent Jericka Duncan reports.
Donald Trump's business empire and political future is in more jeopardy tonight. New York Attorney General Letitia James saying her investigation of the Trump Organization is now in a criminal capacity. Her investigators have joined Manhattan District Attorney Cy Vance Jr.'s team, which is already pursuing criminal charges against the former president's organization. A key target of the investigation is longtime Trump Organization CFO Allen Weisselberg. CBS News has learned investigators are looking at the legality of tuition payments Weisselberg made to his grandchildren's New York private school. His former daughter-in-law says some of the checks were signed by Weisselberg or Donald Trump.
He knows where all the bodies are buried. If there were accounting tricks, they would have had to go by him.
Investigators are also looking at 8 years' worth of Trump's tax returns and financial records. They're focused on whether his company inflated the value of multiple properties to get favorable loans, something his former fixer, Michael Cohen, who posted this picture last night, alleged to Congress 2 years ago.
Everything was done with the knowledge and at the direction of Mr. Trump.
And Jericka Duncan joins me now. Jericka, thanks for being here. So why did the New York Attorney General decide to pursue a criminal investigation into former President Trump in addition to the ongoing civil probe?
Well, we know there had always been questions about some of the financial dealings within the Trump Organization. So what you have right now are these two forces coming together, not just civilly, but now criminally. And the idea and the thought from other attorneys that we spoke to today is that they sort of have each information that could help build this case. As to what that is and what evidence they have and what the next steps are still uncertain. But we know what was so crucial was the Manhattan District Attorney here, Cy Vance Jr., who had been trying to get records, trying to get those tax returns and financial statements from the former president, went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and ultimately he did get those records a couple of months ago. What's also notable here in terms of how quickly this might be resolved or move forward is that Cy Vance Jr. is not running for district attorney here in Manhattan. So there are a lot of people speculating that we might know more sooner than later.
And Jericka, what is the former president saying in his defense?
You know, it's no surprise the president fired back today. He's been calling, every investigation, if you will, even when he was president, a witch hunt, feeling as though when you look at the dynamics of the attorney general here being a Democrat and the Manhattan District Attorney, Cy Vance Jr., being a Democrat, he's saying this is an effort to conspire against someone that they didn't want to run for president when he announced here in Trump Tower almost 5.5 years ago in 2015 that's what he was doing. So he's saying that this is an attack on him. He called the probe a corrupt investigation in desperate search of a crime.
So, Jericka, you've discussed the criminal and the civil investigation opened by the New York Attorney General, as well as the criminal investigation being conducted by the Manhattan District Attorney. But Mr. Trump is also under criminal investigation in Georgia and Washington as well. What can you tell us about those cases?
That's right, and this is an ongoing investigation. We remember, as you I'm sure remember as well, hearing the president on the phone with the state attorney general, I believe in Georgia, asking about the 10,000 or so votes that he would need to turn Georgia red. And there's an investigation now based on that conversation as to if there was any criminal activity or anything, or anyone could be charged with anything, I should say, in reference to that conversation. And then separately, you have prosecutors in Washington, D.C. that have been looking at the financial side of the inauguration committee, saying that the hotel that he used, that he owns for the inauguration ceremonies, that they sort of maybe overcharged or used, overcharged, I guess would be the best word to use in reference to some of the events. So You have two investigations happening as well, not just here in New York, but as you mentioned, in Georgia and Washington, D.C. So the pressure is heating up, if you will, but you have a former president who continues to be defiant and believes that he did nothing wrong.
Jericka, before I let you go, the Trump Organization has been accused of not providing sufficient financial records for some of these ongoing cases. Do we have any reason to expect more cooperation from the Trump Organization with this now being a criminal case in New York?
You know, based on the statements that the former president made today, I would say no. And even when you look at the Mueller investigation and other investigations when he was in office, they weren't necessarily interested. Sorry about that. Weren't always necessarily interested in cooperating with investigators, with members of Congress to get information or give information that could help to shed light on some of the questions people have had.
All right, Jericka, thanks for sticking with us and breaking it all down for us.
Absolutely. Have a good night.